his fascination with distance, unknown places, especially Africa, and how that childhood dream eventually collided with the hard realities of colonial exploration. So Conrad begins by evoking the allure of regions unknown and those mysterious and uncharted parts of the world that stimulated his young imagination. And these places were not just physical location, rather they represented the ultimate enigmatic, untouched, and full of potential for revelation. Now, in his mind, he populated these unknown territories with heroic explorers. Sometimes they are worthy, sometimes they are adventurous, and sometimes by devoted men who would work tirelessly. And they would go beyond the boundaries, sometimes capturing fragments of truth through discovery, and sometimes also getting consumed by the very mysteries they sought to unveil. This image is highly romantic, and it talks about the exploration, which reveals Conrad's early admiration for the spirit of adventure and noble pursuit of knowledge. And this is also this, along with this comes both danger and uncertainty. Then there is a moment in the in unit 1 where you would come to see there's a personal recollection revealing how his childhood enthusiasm once subjected Conrad to ridicule. He recalls a day at school when, inspired by a map, he placed his finger on the white heart of Africa, a blank, uncharted region, and boldly declared that he would go there one day. And at that time, Africa was still largely a mystery to the European imagination, marked on maps with wide spaces indicating unexplored, unknown territory. Conrad's boyish declaration was met with a lot of uh, ridicule, lot of mockery, lot of disdain by his peers. So look at the kind of calling which, as a boy, Conrad had. And he was so sure that one day he would travel there. And look, these peers had always been disdaining, who presumably found his ambition to be unrealistic, thinking that, oh, he's just a small little young boy, he's just saying just like that, so there may not be any meaning to it. So this appears to be naive. But look where he finds himself during his journey. So the most powerful part of this unit is its culmination. 18 years later, that this dream actually became a lived reality. Conrad finds himself aboard a small steamboat along an African river. The romanticism of his childhood now has become uh, a tangible experience, and the the feeling. Uh, the feeling of being on that steamboat, and where there is absolutely no vessel of glory, it reflects instead the difficulty or the unease of the imperial presence. There are physical surroundings around Conrad which are isolated, which are ominous, which are dark, and which convey a haunting sense of the dread. There is a just one light, the only light, which is a solitary little light on a small island amid broken water. And in that fragile glow, in that flickering glow, he experiences an eerie moment of recognition. He realizes, and perhaps he's also touched with a bit of sorrow and irony, that this is the very place he had dreamed of as a boy. So the place he had once announced he would reach is exactly the place that he has already reached. So there is this unit which talks about his triumphant, both triumphant and tragic. It represents the realization of his childhood dream, but now this dream has been transformed into something more complex. The glories, of exploration have now become entangled with the colonial exploitation. And this is what where the word tragic word comes in. There is loneliness around, there is spiritual disillusionment, and the boy's innocent desire for ambition, for adventure, has now been met with the deeper awareness of imperial violence and existential unease. So, this is all about Unit 1. So, let's go to Unit 2. Unit 2 talks about literary analysis. So, like in the beginning of Unit 1, we talked about various themes that are interplaying, for example, moralism and other isms like modernism, imperialism, and colonialism. So, this is an interplay between this unit is an interplay between also between ideology and the narrative technique in the novel, and this places it within the broader literary and philosophical context. So, moralism, which is discussed in Unit 2, arose partly as a reaction to the romantic subjectivity, which was once marked by emotional excess, personal expression, and individualistic imagination. Romanticism, in its turn, has emphasized the inner world of the individual, subjective feeling, the sublime, and the nature's grandeur. By the late 19th and the early 20th century, such subjectivity had begun to feel insufficient in addressing the glowing complexities of an industrial, imperial, and alienated modern world. Thus, a new movement began to emerge, and that favored critical distance, objectivity, and formal innovation. And with this transformation, commonly associated with literary modernism, Joseph Conrad came to occupy a transitional yet essential position. Although Conrad was not among the central figures of high modernism when it initially took shape, he became a vital precursor and a bridge between Victorian literary tradition and modernist innovation. He had his early association with Ford Madox Ford, and he was a key instigator of modernist thought and literary experimentation, and he also played a very crucial role. Ford was an editor, he was a novelist, he was also a literary collaborator, and his influence on younger modernists like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, James Joyce was significant. Ford's friendship with Conrad offered the latter intellectual companionship and creative exchange at a time when Conrad was still defining his artistic voice. So the mention of Eliot is vital here, not only because Eliot admired Conrad and drew inspiration from him, but because Eliot represented a kind of aesthetic shift that Conrad's work seemed to anticipate. So Eliot even used the phrase the horror as the epigraph to the wasteland. So it clearly suggests how Eliot has been a thorough admired person from towards Conrad. But one hallmark of the shift was the use of impersonality in narration, and what Eliot himself advocated in traditional and the individual talent. In this theory, Eliot suggested that poetry should not be direct expression of the poet's emotion, but instead something shaped and filtered through some kind of a structure and form. In this parallel way, in a parallel way, Conrad also employed narrative distance in Heart of Darkness by embedding the story within layers. The story is told by an unnamed narrator who listens to Marlowe, who recounts his experiences. And this narrative frame serves not only to detach the story from Conrad's personal voice, but also create space for ambiguity and multiple interpretations. So, this distancing technique, creating space between author and narrator, between story and voice, aligns Conrad with modernist narrative strategies, particularly the stream of consciousness or multi perspectivity and indirect narration, which became central to literary techniques of writers like Henry James. James, in fact, formalized the idea of point of view as a core narrative tool, arguing that every story had to be told from a specific psychological and perceptual standpoint. This idea, as literary theorist Frederick Jameson, uh, notes that this is not merely a stylistic concern but an ideological necessity born out of the historical conditions of the novel. As society became more fragmented, as capitalism advanced, and as the notion of a unified, coherent subject dissolved, the novel had to reflect this splintering. Hence, stories now require techniques that would dramatize the instability of truth, reality, and perception. Conrad's own biological context adds further depth in his narrative strategies and ideological positioning. He was born a Polish subject under Russian domination. Conrad experienced firsthand the weight of imperial power. Later, after adopting British nationality, he was both inside and outside the colonial system, a man shaped by multiple empires. He turned away from a successful maritime career to embrace the uncertain vocation of writing in English, a language not his mother tongue. These existential displacements and layered affiliations informed the thematic content of Heart of Darkness, a text concerned with exile, alienation, authority, and voice. So the question here is, does Conrad's technique merely reflect an aesthetic choice or does it serve a deeper ideological purpose? The answer lies in how his formal methods are inseparable from his critique of empire and civilization. Marlowe's ambiguous moral stance, his hesitations and half revelations, his deep uncertainty about Mr. Kurtz and the imperial mission, all these are embedded in the narrative's structure of indirection. Conrad's deliberate blurring of moral clarity mirrors the moral ambivalence of the colonial venture itself. There is no omniscient narrator to guide us. Instead, we get a filtered, hesitant, and fragmentary perspective. This technique makes the novel Heart of Darkness not only a psychological exploration but also a political one, questioning the justifications and illusions behind imperialism. Returning to Frederick Jameson's insights, the technique of point of view is not just an aesthetic gesture, it is his Marxist understanding, a response to socio historical transformations. The subject, once the center of narrative, has been displaced, and fiction now works to recover that lost center through form, often indirectly. For Conrad, this means using layered narrations, irony, gaps, and silences. Thus, we cannot separate Heart of Darkness content, its indictment of colonialism, its obsession with truth and illusion, from its formal innovation. There is a concept of time and distance. The In Unit 2, the section Time and Distance that explores the depth of the evolution of the narrative techniques in Joseph Conrad's work, with a particular focus on point of view, distance, and the intersection of personal and cultural identity. So, in early English fiction, especially in realist novels, the narrative point of view was typically omniscient. The narrator seemed to know everything and passed moral judgment clearly. This voice was closely aligned with the author's own implied stance, giving readers a sense of stability and certainty. Think of it as a kind of godlike presence telling you what to believe, how to judge characters, and what values to trust. But in modernist fiction, this clear separation between good and bad, right and wrong, truth and falsehood begins to dissolve. Ambiguity enters, and so does experimentation. So before Conrad, there are other experimentations with the narrative form. For instance, in the Canterbury Tales, where various characters narrate their own stories, or in epistolary novels like Clarissa, which shows multiple perspectives through letters. But these earlier works still tend to imply an overarching authority that organizes the story into a coherent moral whole. By the time we arrive at writers like James Joyce or Virginia Woolf, the authorial certainty vanishes. What emerges instead is a fragmented sense of self, a splintered consciousness, often expressed through stream of consciousness or interior monologue. But the path to that full fledged modernism passes through figures like Henry James and, crucially, Joseph Conrad. Henry James introduced more subtle forms of narration. Instead of omniscient voice, he allows his characters' thoughts to shape the narration, making the reader experience the world from within the characters' mental frameworks. Joseph Conrad picks up this idea and pushes it further. He wants to create a narrative that feels psychologically deep, morally ambiguous, and culturally complex. And to do so, he had to break with the omniscient narrator tradition. In Conrad's early novels like Almayer's Folly or let's say mm, and an outcast of the islands, he still uses traditional narrative voices. These early works often conformed uh, ideologically to the British imperialistic overview. In 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 part, this was strategic. Conrad, a Polish emigre with no strong English identity, was writing for an English readership and trying to break into English literary scene. He was advised to write sea fiction, and he followed that advice. In doing so, his earliest fiction aligned with British imperial ideologies, often presenting a masculine colonialist tone. However, as his confidence as writer grew, as he entered his so called Blackwood phase, his narrative technique changed significantly. This is when Marlowe first appears in Youth and later in Heart of Darkness. Marlowe is fictional device through which Conrad can express ideas, experiences, and critics that he cannot safely or easily voice himself, given his status as a foreigner writing for an English public. Marlowe then is not merely a narrator, he is a narrative mask, a proxy through which Conrad explores the disintegration of empire, the illusions of civilization, and the inner darkness of the human psyche. He is at once inside and outside the cultural framework. He speaks in the voice of an English seaman, rational, experienced, worldly, but he sees deeper than the surface ideology. Marlowe allows Conrad to articulate a perspective that critiques empire while appearing to speak from within it. This distance between Marlowe and Conrad, between narrator and author, is essential. It allows Conrad to engage in irony, a stance where the narrator may say one thing but mean another, where the gap between belief and reality can be exposed without over preaching. For instance, in Heart of Darkness, Marlowe often reflects sardonically on the supposed nobility of imperialism, exposing its hollowness. He speaks of the so called civilizing mission of Europeans in Africa and contrasts it with the brutal reality he encounters. Further, Marlowe's narration itself is framed. In Heart of Darkness, there is an anonymous narrator who begins the tale, describing a group of men sitting on a boat on the Thames River listening to Marlowe. So we have a narrator within a narrator, another distancing device that allows Conrad to avoid any direct alignment with a single perspective. The frame narrator is idealistic and reverent towards the British Empire, seeing the Thames as a river of progress and glory. But when Marlowe begins to speak, that myth starts to unravel. He draws a parallel between ancient Roman colonizers and modern British imperialists, suggesting that empire is always violent, greedy, and morally bankrupt. This dual narrative structure, someone telling you about Marlowe, telling you about his experience, is crucial to Conrad's style. It signals that truth is not singular, that meaning is always filtered through layers of perception and prejudice. It also mirrors the novel's major themes, for example, obscurity, ambiguity, and the elusiveness of truth, the moral darkness lurking beneath the civilization. The title itself, Heart of Darkness, refers both to the literal Congo, the geographic center of colonial exploitation, and to the metaphorical darkness in human soul. The transition to this style with Marlowe at the center also reflects Conrad's personal evolution. He had tried to fully assimilate into English culture, changing his name from Joseph Theodore Conrad to Joseph Conrad, but he remained a foreigner in many ways. Through Marlowe, he could explore Englishness from within, as somehow or the other, both immersed and alienated. Marlowe is not Conrad, but he is a creation that allowed Conrad to speak with authority and yet remain detached. The importance of point of view in Heart of Darkness goes far beyond literary technique. It is tied to Conrad's personal identity, his political skepticism, his ideological critics, and his contribution to the development of modernist literature. Marlowe's narration is not just a method of storytelling, it is a method of thinking. It reveals not only what happens in the story, but how stories themselves are shaped by who tells them, from where, and with what consciousness. Hence, Conrad's use of Marlowe as a narrator reflects a deliberate and complex response to both personal and historical pressures. It marks his departure from the omniscient imperial voice through a layered, ionic, and deeply modern narrative form. This shift enables Heart of Darkness to critique empire not through didactic exposition, but through the psychological disorientation of its characters and readers. In doing so, Conrad anticipates the fragmentation, subjectivity, and moral ambiguity that would become hallmarks of modernist fiction. So, this is Unit 2, and we now shift to Unit 3. Unit 3, this is another literary analysis, and this is part 2. This unit also has an introduction, and this unit is indeed a crucial turning point in the understanding. And because we already know now that the novel, The Heart of Darkness, is not simply a story, but there is a work of art which is involved and an object of critical interpretation across different times and perspectives. So, um, the preface to The Nigger of Narcissus. This is an excerpt from the preface to The Nigger of the Narcissus, Joseph Conrad's best known declaration of his artistic principles. This preface functions almost like a manifesto, laying out what he believed literature should do. According to Conrad, art must justify itself in every time. This means that a work of literature should not exist merely for entertainment or superficial delight and then forgotten. It should reflect a serious, deep engagement with truth, and it should stay with the soul. But the truth he speaks of isn't the kind of empirical truth the scientist seeks or the abstract truth pursued by philosophers. Instead, it is a truth that lies beneath appearances, within the forms, colors, lights, and shadows, and facts of life. In other words, Conrad seeks the emotional, existential, and symbolic truths behind the external world. The artist distends within himself. His appeal is made to our less obvious capacities. Conrad says the artist appeals to our inner, hidden sensibilities, not to our intellect or practical logic. This appeal may not always be loud or even easy to recognize. It is subtle, ambiguous, and often more emotional than rational. It is also more enduring because it touches that part of human nature which is innate rather than learned, what Conrad calls the gift in us. Um, uh, why Conrad told this story the way he did, this is probably one of the insight that he offers through the novel The Heart of Darkness. His goal wasn't to present facts or argue an ideological case. Instead, he wanted to immerse the reader in a symbolic and emotional experience to make them feel the darkness, not just understand it intellectually. The Congo journey, which is not simply geographical or political, it becomes a journey into the soul, both Marlowe's and Conrad's. And by extension, if the reader is also connected to the narrator and the author here, the reader is also pulled into that same moral psychological space. Conrad's own characters, own words later in life, before the Congo, I was a beast, show how transformative the experience was for him. It traumatized him, it shook his beliefs, and it leaves him with an emotional scar. That intensity of feeling is what he tried to channel through the novel. It wasn't enough for him to describe the brutality of colonialism. He wanted to evoke the horror, the ambiguity, and the moral decay through imagery, atmosphere, and voice. The modern readers no longer share Conrad's assumption. His universal claims about human nature, truth, morality have been challenged by the modern theory, especially post colonial criticism. In today's intellectual climate, there is skepticism about so called universal values or transcendental truths. We are more aware that what seems universal may in fact reflect a European or colonial perspective. Different readers will respond to a text based on their subject positions, their identity, their background, their culture, or also their experience, personal experiences. An African reader may be outraged by the way the Congo and its people are presented. Uh, the author Chinua Achebe from Africa, he was really outraged by the way this was described in the book. A post colonial critic might interrogate the underlying assumptions about race, civilization, and savagery. A feminist reader might critique the silence or absence of women in the novel. A modernist might admire the psychological depth and formal experimentation. So, this is the crux of reading Heart of Darkness today. While Conrad's aim may have been to touch something enduring and human, the meaning and impact of his work are no longer fixed or stable. They vary depending on who is reading, when, where, and with what lens. uh, you must make sense of your own reading experience. This is the key insight. That is what Conrad is trying to tell. There is no correct meaning of Heart of Darkness. Depends on the reader's understanding, how which is shaped by their identity, their beliefs, their education, and their worldview. And that is part of richness and the challenge of reading Conrad today. As a course or analysis, uh, course analysis, as when how we are doing the course analysis, we come to explore how different subject position, African, Indian, post colonial, feminist, etc., approach the text. But in today's critical landscape, the artistic intention that Conrad has, which was to explore deep universal human truth through mood, atmosphere, and emotional resonance, are absolutely absent. The universal truths are contested, and therefore the text becomes a site of multiple, sometimes conflicting interpretations. Conrad believed that art should reveal emotional and existential truths beneath the surface of life. Instead, the meaning of text varies by subject propositions, supposition, and in a post colonial and multicultural world, readers no longer accept one single theory or one single proposition as a universal interpretation. So, the next section, an approach to meaning, under Unit 3 Literary Analysis 2, delves into the interpretive challenges of Heart of Darkness by highlighting both the ambiguity of Conrad's language and the layers of meaning embedded in the narrative. At its core, this analysis acknowledges the frequent frustration experienced by readers and critics alike. Conrad's refusal to offer straightforward answers or to construct a neatly packaged message. Instead, the meaning of the tale seems to hover just out of reach, surrounding the narrative rather than being content with it. This elusive quality has drawn both admiration and criticism. Critics such as F.R. Lewis and E.M. Foster found fault with what they perceived as the vagueness and over elaboration of Conrad's prose. Lewis complained about Conrad's adjectival insistence on the knowledgeable, unspeakable rights, monstrous passions, and inconceivable mystery. This linguistic excess, he argued, points to Conrad's lack of clarity about what he is trying to say. Forster's more poetically said that the secret casket of Conrad's genius holds not on a jewel but a vapor, suggesting that what seems profound might actually be empty. These criticisms strike at the very heart of Conrad's method, the tension between substance and suggestions, between surface, detail, and symbolic resonance. But rather than defend Conrad outright, the passage invites readers to understand his method. The narrative structure of Heart of Darkness appears deceptively simple. It is divided into three parts that chart a clear physical journey from Europe to Central Station, then then to the inner station, and finally back to Europe, framed as a tale told by Marlowe aboard the Nelly, a ship anchored in the Thames. The story employs the familiar yarn of seaman convention. However, unlike a traditional adventure story with a clear moral or resolution, Heart of Darkness resists closure. Its form is impressionistic, its meanings diffuse and elusive, more like fog or moonlight than hard substance. From the beginning, Conrad introduces key themes that resist simplification. One of the earliest phrases, the fascination of the abomination, captures the moral ambiguity at the heart of the novel. This paradox reflects the dual attraction and repulsion that colonialism, power, and savagery exert on human psyche. Rather than condemn or justify, the story inhabits the tension between these poles. Marlowe's own narrative is riddled with contradictions. He wishes not to bore his listeners with his personal story, yet he speaks in deeply personal terms. He disclaims any heroic purpose, but the narrative follows a classic journey into the unknown. These contradictions are not mistakes, they are essential to Conrad's method. One of the clearest signals of this complexity is found in the frame narrator's description of Marlowe's storytelling. Traditional sailors' stories are said to have direct simplicity. The meaning lies within the shell of a cracked nut, but not Marlowe's. His tales are different. Their meaning are different. The narrator says lies outside, like a halo or a mist, something intangible, perceptible only in the right light. This metaphor is crucial. Conrad, through his commentary, seems to warn readers not to expect a straightforward moral lesson or tidy plot. Meaning in Heart of Darkness is atmospheric, symbolic, and subjective. It does not reside the events themselves, but in the aura they cast, the emotional and ethical response they provoke. Marlowe's repeated references to things being unspeakable further deepen the mystery. He insists that what he witnessed in the Congo cannot be fully communicated. Language fails in the face of such horror and complexity. This linguistic inadequacy is not a flaw in the narration but a part of its very structure. It reflects a modernist concern with the limits of knowledge and representation. As Marlowe says, the reality I tell you fades, the inner truth is hidden, luckily. Here, Conrad points to an epistemological problem. The more you focus on the surface, on mere facts or events, the more the deeper reality recedes. It is only through suggestion, symbol, and mood that one might glimpse the inner truth. This approach aligns closely with Conrad's earlier artistic principle quoted in the previous section from the preface to The Nigger of the Narcissus. There, he claims that art should aim to reveal the enduring truth beneath appearances, not by explaining it, but by evoking it. That is why Heart of Darkness is often considered a symbolist or impressionist work rather than a realistic one. The meaning does not reside in what Marlowe sees or does, but in how these experiences are filtered through his consciousness and how they resonate in the reader's imagination. This technique makes the story morally and philosophically ambiguous. Why does Kurtz, for instance, muttered the words, the horror, on his deathbed? Is it a condemnation of his own actions, a vision of human depravity, or a last minute recognition of some cosmic truth? Conrad refuses to clarify. Similarly, why does Marlowe lie to Kurtz intended about his final Kurt's fiance about his final words, or does he lie at all? His decision to spare her the brutal truth may be seen as an act of kindness or cowardice, or a gesture of complicity with the very hypocrisy the tale critics. These, these moments underscore the narrative's ethical complexity. Even the outer frame of the story, the setting on the Nelly, the calm of the Thames, stands in contrast to the inner chaos that Marlowe recounts. The other listeners aboard the yacht are drawn into Marlowe's tale, but they remain distanced, anchored in comfort, unable to fully grasp or share in his psychological journey. This contrast reinforces the idea that Marlowe, and by extension the reader, is isolated in his perception. The others can listen, but they cannot fully understand. Their reality is insulated, civilized. Marlowe's has been touched by the dark. In sum, Conrad method in Heart of Darkness is deliberate in its ambiguity and atmospheric intensity. Rather than giving answers, he offers impressions. Rather than resolve moral questions, he raises them. Meaning is not located at the center of the story like a kernel, but surrounds it like mist, inviting the reader to feel rather than to know. This method frustrates critics looking for clarity but rewards readers who are willing to navigate uncertainty and confront the darkness within themselves. Conrad's narrative is finally a journey not only into Congo or into Kurds, but into the soul of Western civilization and the soul of the reader. The next passage is Delayed Decoding, that explores a crucial aspect of Heart of Darkness, the inner nature of Marlowe's journey, the role of perception, and the narrative method Conrad employs to communicate meaning. The passage argues that while Marlowe appears to be recounting a geographical and physical journey into the Congo, what he truly chronically does is a deep personal and psychological adventure. His travels are external only in form, the real journey unfolds within his own consciousness. This makes the narrative a kind of spiritual or philosophical odyssey, much less about exotic lands and more about confronting the unknown recesses of the self. Marlowe, once a traditional seaman and adventurer, is now presented as a reflective figure who has matured into a conscientious storyteller. He is no longer merely interested in recounting events for entertainment. Instead, he is intensely preoccupied with conveying the psychological truth of his experience, which often proves elusive and resistant to articulation. This internalization of the journey is made clear when Marlowe says that he does not wish to bore his listeners with personal details, only to then stress that to understand the story's impact, they must know how he came to the Congo and what he experienced. This contradiction is telling uh, is is it underscores how inseparable the external journey is from his internal transformation. The phrase "a kind of light," which Marlowe uses to describe the ambiguous insight he gained, becomes emblematic. It contrasts with the darkness of the title and suggests that whatever meaning he gleaned is partial, fragmented, and shrouded in obscurity. The light he speaks of is not clarity, but a faint, wavering illumination in a sea of uncertainty. This conflict between light and dark, knowledge and ignorance, becomes a symbolic axis around which the entire novel resolves. Yet, Conrad complicates this axis further by subverting traditional association. Light, typically linked with truth and reason in Western literature, is not always benign in Heart of Darkness. It often accompanies imperial violence and delusion. Darkness, conversely, may represent not only savagery or the unknown, but also a kind of honest confrontation with reality. These symbols resist easy binaries and instead mirror the moral complexity of the story itself. What deepens the psychological and philosophical layers of the text is the method Conrad uses to reveal meaning, what has come to be known as delayed decoding. Through this technique, Conrad does not allow his protagonist or his readers to immediately grasp the significance of events. The interpretation of what is seen or heard is postponed, echoing the way people often process traumatic or overwhelming experiences. Conrad wants the reader to feel before they understand. This mirrors his artistic mission, stated in the preface to The Nigger of the Narcissus, where he says the aim of art is to make you hear, to make you feel. It is before all to make you see. In this context, perception becomes an act of creation and not just reception. Marlowe's struggle to narrate his story parallels the reader's struggle to comprehend it. Both must move through layers of emotional and symbolic fog. One of the best examples of this technique is found during Marlowe's approach to Kurds, when his steamboat suddenly comes under attack. At first, Marlowe does not realize what is happening. He notices the unusual behavior of the crew. The poleman lies flat on the deck. The fireman ducks his head. These details are confusing, and Marlowe recounts them without immediate understanding. Only gradually does he piece the scene together and finally exclaims, "Arrows by Jove, we were being shot at." This mimics the natural human process of interpretation, the confusion and the sensory overload before clarity dawns, and forces the reader to share in the disorientation. Conrad here does not simply describe an event but recreates the experience of that event in real time. An even more powerful instance of delayed decoding comes with the infamous detail of heads on stakes outside Kurt's station. At first, Marlowe sees only ornamental posts with round knobs. The description is vague and almost decorative, with the upper ends ornamented with round carved balls. Neither he nor the reader understands the sinister nature of these objects at that moment. Only much later does Marlowe return to the image and reveal that these ornaments are in fact human skulls, severed heads mounted as grotesque trophies. The impact of this revelation is profound because the reader, like Marlowe, must reconstruct the horror from fragments. The delayed recognition makes the truth more jarring, more visceral, and more morally unsettling. This is not a horror that is presented for shock value. It is a horror that slowly seeps in, undermining all previous assumptions and comforts. The philosophical implications of such narrative technique is significant. Marlowe reflects on the impossibility of conveying the true essence of lived experience. No, it is impossible. It is impossible to convey the live sensation of any given epoch of one's existence, he says. We live as we dream alone. This insight not only explains the difficulty of his storytelling task, but also underscores the existential solitude at the heart of the novel. Experiences are deeply personal, often beyond language, and ultimately isolating. Even though Marlowe is speaking to others, even though he is trying to narrate his past, he knows that what he felt, what he saw in its fullness, can never be truly shared. So, through this interplay of personal perception, delayed recognition, and symbolic opacity, Heart of Darkness emerges as modernist masterpiece. Its power lies not in what it tells, but in how it makes the reader's experience the process of meaning making. Marlowe's adventure is not heroic in the traditional sense, it is a confrontation with moral ambiguity, psychological disturbance, and the limits of human understanding. The Congo becomes not just a setting, but a mirror in which Marlowe and, by extension, Western civilization must face its own darkness. Conrad, by refusing to offer a clear moral lesson or narrative resolution, instead forces the readers to navigate that darkness with the same unease and uncertainty that Marlowe himself feels. The story's true impact then lies not in its events, but in the lingering questions and emotional shadows it leaves behind. So, this is Unit 3, end of Unit 3. Unit 4 talks about race, empire, gender in Heart of Darkness. In this unit, the focus shifts to the political and literal strategy of Joseph Conrad in Heart of Darkness, particularly in relation to the ideological climate of his time. This unit argues that Conrad was deeply aware of the sensitivities and prejudices of his English readership and, as a result, avoided overt political critique that might alienate or offend them. Instead, he employed a strategy of subtlety and irony, appearing to conform to the conventions of imperial adventure while simultaneously undermining and questioning its very foundations. In this unit, Conrad makes a very careful self presentation, and it is generally seen as a very tactical move. He wrote within the dominant genre of the time, the colonial adventure story, so that his critics could be slipped in under the guise of conventional narrative. This explains why many of his contemporary misread Heart of Darkness as a straightforward story of exploration and empire. One such early reviewer stated that Conrad made no attack on colonialism or imperialism, reflecting a widespread inability to recognize the text's deeper subversive elements. The brilliance of Conrad's narrative approach lies in its ambiguity. On the surface, he could be seen as merely documenting imperial exploits, but a closer, more discerning reading reveals a searing critique of the moral, psychological, and political decay at the heart of the empire. Edward Garnett, a friend and supporter of Conrad, was one of the first to recognize that Heart of Darkness offered more than an exotic tale. It exposed the suppressed truths of European imperialism in Africa. He called the novel a page torn from the life of the Dark Continent, suggesting that it revealed the brutal realities that were usually concealed from the European public. Garnett's insight highlights how Conrad used fiction to unveil the darkness, not in Africa as a colonial narrative typically framed it, but within the colonizers themselves. This divergence in interpretation has continued over the decades. Post colonial criticism, particularly from African writers and scholars, has engaged passionately and often controversially with the Conrad's work. One of the most famous and influential critics came from Chinua Achebe, who, in a lecture which was published in the Massachusetts Review in 1977, called Conrad a bloody racist. Achebe argued that the novel dehumanizes Africans, reducing them to mere background noise or symbols of savagery, and perpetuates harmful racial stereotypes. According to him, Conrad may have condemned the excesses of imperialism, but he still viewed Africans through a lens of European superiority. This position has become foundational for post colonial readings of Heart of Darkness, emphasizing the need to examine the text not for what it says but also for what it omits, erases, or distorts. However, not all African critics agreed with Achebe. There was another critic, a writer and a scholar, Ezekiel Falele, a South African writer and scholar. He defended Conrad, arguing that he was one of the rare white authors of his time who could depict characters from other cultures with depth and sensitivity. In the African image, Falele wrote that Conrad belonged to a small group of white novelists capable of engaging with the other in a competent and nuanced way. This suggests that Conrad, while working with the limitations of his era, was still ahead of many of his peers in his efforts to reflect cultural and racial complexities. What accounts for this wide gap is interpretation. The passage suggests that the key lies in how the readers interpret the character of Kurds. Kurds, the mysterious ivory trader who becomes a demigod in the Congo, is central to understanding Conrad's view of empire. He embodies both the ideals and the horrors of imperialism, an eloquent man who speaks of lofty missions and civilizational duty, but who ultimately descends into madness and commits unspeakable atrocities. For some, Kurz exposes the moral bankruptcy at the core of imperial ideology. His famous last words, the horror, become a damning indictment of the entire colonial enterprise. For others, however, Kurtz is treated too ambiguously, and Conrad's refusal to provide a more explicit condemnation is taken as evidence of complicity or moral cowardice. Similarly, the nature of the relationship between Marlowe and Conrad complicates any straightforward reading. Marlowe is often considered Conrad's mouthpiece, but the text also shows Marlowe questioning, struggling, and even contradicting himself. He uses language that reflects colonial attitudes, often speaking of Africans in derogatory or objectifying terms, and he makes dismissive comments about women. This leads to confusion. Is Marlowe simply reflecting the prejudices of his time, or is Conrad using him ironically to expose those prejudices? If readers see no gap between Conrad and Marlowe, they are likely to find the novel racist and misogynistic. What if they see Marlowe as an unreliable or conflicted narrator? Then Heart of Darkness becomes a powerful critic of race, gender, and empire. There is evidence that Conrad was indeed aware of the racial question and its centrality to imperial discourse. In a letter to a French correspondent, he described Heart of Darkness as, among other things, a study of racial differences. This supports the idea that Conrad was not indifferent to racial issues but was trying, perhaps clumsily or consciously, to explore them within the constraints of his literary and cultural environment. He saw race and empire as intertwined themes, both essential to human condition and to imperial adventure he sought to interrogate. The political and ideological implications of Heart of Darkness remains open to debate. Its ambiguity, whether a flaw or a feature, is what makes it one of the most enduring and contested works of modern literature. The next part is Kipling's Squint, which discusses the contrast between Conrad's Heart of Darkness and the prevailing pro imperialist sentiment represented by Rudyard Kipling, focusing particularly on the ideological implications of Kipling's work and Conrad's quiet subversion of such ideologies. In the late 19th century, British imperialism was often celebrated in literature as a noble and a civilizing mission, and no writer symbolized this imperial confidence more than Kipling. His famous poem, The White Man's Burden, which was published in 1899, the same year as Heart of Darkness, urged Western nations, particularly the British and Americans, to take up the supposed moral obligation of empire to bring order, progress, and civilization to the sullen peoples under their control. The poem, with its exhortation to send forth the best ye bred to serve your captives' need, captures the self justifying paternalism that underpinned imperial ideology. Kipling's imperial vision was both rhetorical and persuasive. It assumed that colonized people were inherently inferior and in need of Western governance, and it couched conquest in the language of duty and sacrifice. This brand of idealism, often referred to as Kipling's, viewed imperialism not as exploitation but as benevolence and destiny, with phrases like the wheel of empire, suggesting grandeur, inevitability, and divine purpose. Kipling's style was bombastic, uncritical of the violence or racism inherent in the empire, and influential in shaping public attitudes in Britain and America. Conrad, however, although living and writing within this same cultural moment, took a dramatically different approach. While he seldom made explicit public attacks on British imperialism, perhaps due to personal caution or perhaps to avoid alienating his English readers, he deployed a subtler, more ionic mode of critique. His views did occasionally surface through ionic language, such as in his rare references to Kipling. In one letter, he refers to Kipling's worldview with a stinging remark about Kipling's squint, a metaphor that suggests both a distortion of vision and a willful blindness. The term implies that Kipling sees the world through a biased, perhaps morally twisted lens, shaped by imperialist ideology. Conrad's views on war and empire were severely subversive, though often cloaked in irony and understatement. In a letter to Graham Cunningham, written during the time of Boer War, a conflict fought between the British and the Dutch settlers in South Africa, Conrad expresses a deep and sarcastic frustration. He criticizes the very premise of the war, not merely its execution. He calls it inexpressibly stupid, not only on moral grounds but also on strategic ones. For Conrad, to begin a war within understanding its implications is, as he puts it, positively imbecile. The logic of this argument dismantles the notion that war, when poorly conceived, can ever serve a higher purpose, such as Kipling's idea of spreading democracy or civilization. Conrad's bitter irony intensifies when he draws a chilling analogy. If a murder is being committed in the next room and one cannot prevent it, then one might as well hope for it to be finished swiftly, for the sake of your feelings. Here he uses the language of emotional detachment and resignation to expose the barbarity lurking beneath the supposed heroism of empire. This metaphor is not just a justification, but an indictment. Conrad is clearly disturbed by the whole appalling fatuity of imperial conquest. Even when he wishes for British success, it is not out of patriotic fervor, but out of a bleak desire to see the violence concluded quickly. The sarcasm underscores the futility and horror of the enterprise. Like Marlowe in Heart of the Darkness, who responds to criticism of Kurt's methods by asserting that there is no method at all, Conrad's own critique of imperialism lies in his refusal to separate method from moral justification. Whether brutal or efficient, the machinery of empire itself is fundamentally corrupt in his view. It is not about whether colonizers were kind or cruel, organized or chaotic, democratic or autocratic. The problem is the imperial project itself. This idea is a direct challenge to Kipling's more superficial concern with methods of rule or cultural superiority. The next part in Unit 4 focuses on race, which is particularly the way European characters embody and perpetuate the racial and imperial ideologies of the time. One of the earliest example of this character, whose seemingly minor presence in the novel is actually quite significant. Conrad is deliberate in introducing this character known as Freslevin, who is not just an individual, but also an but also a representation of European imperialism. His race, nationality, and gender are emphasized, all of which place him within the framework of those deemed suitable to carry out the so-called civilizing mission of empire. Freslevin death, which occurs before Marlowe's central narrative begins, becomes the catalyst for Marlowe's journey and therefore serves as a symbolic prelude to the absurdity and hypocrisy that the story exposes. Freslevin's death is not the result of any heroic or noble endeavor, but becomes from a trivial altercation over two black hens, an incident that echoes the absurd colonial quarrels seen in the other wars like Conrad's, an outpost of progress. This detail underscores how little substance or dignity truly was in the imperialist pretense of nobility and progress. The fact that this supposedly civilized European agent beats a local chief to death over something so minor and is then himself killed reflects the grotesque inversion of moral values within the colonial framework. Conrad's use of the phrase noble cause without quotation marks reveals his subtle yet piercing irony. Rather than directly condemning the imperial mission, he lets the events and their contradictions speak for themselves. Marlowe's later reflection that the cause of progress got the hens anyhow adds another layer of satirical commentary, suggesting that the imperial mission, far from being progressive, is mired in irrational violence and futility. Even the hens in this context come to symbolize more than just poultry. They evoke the grotesque distortion of values in which minor possessions justify murder, all in the name of civilization. Conrad also populates his novel with a range of European figures from various nationalities, each contributing to the empire's machinery in ways that are mostly useless, delusion, or damaging. The accountant, who is described as elegant, dressed well, symbolizes the hollow image of efficiency, keeping no meaningful records in a place of chaos. The station manager, supposedly a leader, is more concerned with maintaining his position and gossiping than with achieving anything tangible. The doctor, whose task is to examine recruits for their mental health, becomes a disturbing figure of scientific detachment. Though he is aligned with the cause of progress, his scientific posturing does little to conceal his desire to stay far from the madness he helps perpetuate. So, likewise, the next section talks about the women that offers a rich, layered reading of how African women are presented in Heart of Darkness, especially focusing on the mysterious and powerful African woman associated with Kurds at the inner station. The analysis draws attention to the differences in how African women, as opposed to white European women, are depicted and symbolized in the novel. African women appear in only a very few instances in the narrative and rarely with names and direct voices. One early representation is a woman being taught by the company's accountant. This woman is mentioned almost in passing, and the tone is condescending. Her reluctance to work and her disinterest in what the Europeans are trying to impose on her, likely some form of clerical labor or housekeeping, is described as a problem, even as the narrator notes how difficult it was. This brief moment already illustrates how African women are seen through the eyes of the colonizers as bodies to be disciplined, trained, and made useful according to the logic of empire. But the most significant African woman in the tale is the one associated with Kurds, describing someone as unforgettable, striking terms as a wild and gorgeous apparition, magnificently adorned, walking with proud, deliberate steps. She is introduced with a kind of fear, savage and superb, wild eyed and magnificent. Marlowe's language is revealingly ambiguous and contradictory, mixing admiration with fear, exotizing her while also recognizing her dignity and power. The woman is not treated as a full character in the realist sense. She is never given a name, speaks no lines, remains largely silent except through the symbolic weight of her presence. As the analysis suggests, she functions more as a symbol, possibly the embodiment of Africa itself, or the wilderness, or even a metaphysical force. She becomes a kind of counterpoint to the white women of the novel, especially to Kurds whose fiancé is waiting back in Europe. Importantly, this African woman is not depicted in a completely negative light. She is not merely a savage in opposition to the civilized people. Her emotional presence, her sorrow, her defiance, and her silent authority give her a kind of tragic grandeur. When Kurds is being taken away, she appears at the river bank, silent but powerful, brooding over an inscrutable purpose. This line captures the novel's treatment of the African woman. She is unknowable, resistant to interpretation, and deeply marked by pain. So, this is Unit 4. We start with Unit 5. Unit 5 is titled The Lengthening Shadow, and this part, Lengthening Shadow, around the time when Heart of Darkness was published, a paradigm shift was underway. It was the era of new skepticism, philosophical and scientific, as well as political upheaval. A paradigm shift that was underway was hailed as having been ahead of times, modern. This became a symbol of what was new in a way. Its reputation remained for a few dissenting voices by a major critic. Conrad himself uh, was swayed by modernism, or so it would appear from a letter he wrote to William Blackwood. He said, I am modern, and I would rather recall Wagner, the musician, and Rodin, the whistler, the painter. They too have arrived. They have to suffer from being. So there are a lot of incomplete sentences in the letter, but as we see, pinning down Conrad to an ideology is far from easy. This is especially true of Heart of Darkness. For one thing, he held different, often conflicting views on the ideological issues at different points of time. For another, he uses the mask of Marlowe and complicates the point of view and heaps up various ways of looking at truth to such an extent that the real view of Conrad is well not impossible to grasp. The matter is complicated by the evasion that the narrator performs from time to time. Even Marlowe gets intellectually crippled and fails to grasp fuller meanings of his experience. At the end, we are not sure whether to put the emphasis on the political, existential, or metaphysical aspects of the tale. Politics is foregrounded, no doubt, but as we have seen in some of the earlier units, politics recedes into the background beyond recognition. We simplify, no doubt, to make sense of narrative, maybe by saying that it is through the political scaffolding of the narrative that the metaphysical world of evil is explored, but we do so by severely limiting the scope of this complex work. Conrad himself never believed in explicit statements, nor did he believe in any monologic method. It is this tendency, among others, that makes him so modern in comparison with his exact contemporaries, barring Henry James. Some of the modernist methods which he anticipates were ambiguity and distancing devices to effect impersonality, avoidance of the romanticism, tendencies, and multiplicity of points of view. A few of these we would have occasion to look at in different contexts. Some others, let's delve now with ambiguities and ambivalence. This is the text that offers a deep and nuanced examination of the ambiguity and ambivalence surrounding the novel, illustrating how the title alone opens up a network of meanings and interpretations that resonate throughout the novel. This ambiguity is framed as a hallmark of modernist literature, connecting Conrad to other modernist authors like James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and E.M. Foster. These are the writers who often resisted simple explanations or linear storytelling in favor of layered, uncertain, and reflective narratives. Whether to say the heart of darkness or simply heart of darkness, this is where the author begins by noting that even the choice of the article was deliberate site of ambivalence. If the definite article the had been used, it would suggest a specific and contended idea of darkness. But by omitting it, Conrad allows the darkness to expand in meaning, no longer pinned to one geographical place or moral category. Instead, the darkness becomes a broad, multi layered metaphor, one that can refer simultaneously to Africa, the imperial project, human nature, and psychological or moral degeneration. One common interpretation of the title has been its reference to Africa as a dark continent, a colonial era term that reflected European perceptions of Africa as uncivilized or mysterious or dangerous. Marlowe, the narrator, vividly describes the jungle and the Congo River as terrifying, impenetrable spaces filled with oppressive silence and hidden horrors. Yet, the text complicates this rationalized view by having Marlowe refer to Europe, specifically the Thames River in England, as one of the dark places of earth. This contradiction undermines the assumption that darkness is something foreign or other. Instead, darkness becomes a universal human condition, present in both colonizer and colonized lands. The ambivalence intensifies when we consider Kurt's report, which was meant to be a noble document outlining the civilizing mission of Europeans. While it begins with lofty idealistic language, it ends chillingly with the phrase, exterminate all the brutes. This horrifying postscript completely underdoes the moral and the rhetorical pretense of the preceding pages. It represents the descent from eloquence to barbarism, from civilization's mask to its savage reality. Conrad uses this abrupt contrast to show that imperialism, moral rhetoric, is a sham, and the real impulse behind empire is exploitation and violence. This leads us to the heart in Heart of Darkness. Does the title refer to Kurt's personal heart, the center of this moral and psychological collapse, or is it the heart of the European imperial project stripped of illusions? Or perhaps it is the heart of humanity itself, which, when exposed to the absence of societal norms, as Kurt's was in Jungle, reveals its true corrupt core. These overlapping interpretations make the title a potent emblem of the novel's central concern that beneath the surface of civilization lies something deeply unsettling and unknowable. The wilderness becomes a force that whispers to Kurds, drawing him in and destroying him. As described in the text, the jungle caresses him, loves him, absorbs him, suggesting that the deconstruction is not forced upon him but chosen. This embrace of the wilderness is a part of what transforms Kurds. It reveals to him truths about himself that he could not face. His descent into madness is portrayed almost as a religious or metaphysical initiation, one that seals his soul with the wilderness through some devilish ceremony. It is both an inward journey and a confrontation with something immense, ancient, and beyond comprehension. Marlowe reflects on this, recognizing that what destroyed Kurds was not Africa itself, but what Africa revealed to him, the hollowness inside. The jungle did not corrupt Kurds, it found out what was already there. It is a critical insight. The darkness is not external, but internal. It is an inhuman soul in the unchecked desire for power, domination, and meaning. Kurtz, according to Marlowe, had no substance. He was all eloquence and brilliance on the outside, but empty at the core. This realization is what gives rise to Kurt's dying words, the horror, one of the most famously ambiguous utterances in literature. What does he mean? Is it a recognition of the horror of what he's done? A glimpse into the moral void at the center of the imperial enterprise? Or is it a reflection of the existential dread that comes with absolute self knowledge, the knowledge of one's capacity for evil? The text does not answer this question. Instead, it leaves the readers with Marlowe's conflicted interpretation and a lingering sense of uncertainty, which is precisely the point. Like a true modernist work, Heart of Darkness refuses closure or certainty. It instead thrives on ambiguity, contradiction, and reflection. Ultimately, the title Heart of Darkness encapsulates the novel's core vision of moral and psychological ambiguity. Conrad's thematic use of ambiguity and contradiction with broader modernist techniques, repetition, echo, delayed revelations, and irony. For example, even before Marlowe meets Cuds, he refers to an exalted and pulsating stream of light flowing from the heart of an immense darkness, showing how the categories of light and dark, good and evil, civilized and savage, are always already enlightened. This kind of conceptual reversal, where light can be dark and darkness can reveal truth, is one of the text's most important strategies. It forces the audience, the readers, to abandon easy binaries and question everything they thought they knew. It suggests that the darkest parts of the world may actually lie within us, not in the jungle, not in the other, but in the imperialist, the civilized man, and perhaps even in the audience or the reader. This unsettling possibility is what makes the title so powerful and so haunting. It inaugurates a tradition of literary ambiguity that would influence generations of writers and thinkers, making Conrad one of the early architects of the modernist worldview, where truth is uncertain, meaning is unstable, and darkness may lie at the heart of all things. Marlowe cuts from the study of the novel explores the deep, complex ambiguity that surrounds perception of Marlowe regarding Kurds and how that ambiguity contributes to the psychological and philosophical depth of the book. The author of the tale, Marlowe, is not merely a passive storyteller. He is an active participant in the unfolding events and an interpreter of Kurds. However, his attitude toward Kurds is highly conflicted and unstable. He repeatedly insists that he is not an admirer of Kurds. He claims that Kurds is no idol of his. Yet, this insistence is itself suspicious because Marlowe shows fascination, even obsession, with Kurds. He's drawn to Kurds in the same way he's drawn to the Congo River, which he describes with serpentine imagery, the mighty big river, as an immense snake uncoiled. This is a significant metaphor. The river, like currents, is dangerous, mesmerizing, and symbolic of a descent into a primeval and morally ambiguous world. Marlowe is likened to a silly little bird hypnotized and lured into danger. The narrative thus likens Kurds to a tempting, almost mythic force, akin to the devil in the Christian tradition or Mephistopheles in Dr. Faustus. Furthermore, Marlowe's ambivalence is seen in how uncertain and confused he is when reflecting on his experience. He says things like, "The prehistoric man was cursing us, praying to us, welcoming us. Who could tell?" This rhetorical confusion reveals that Marlowe himself does not fully grasp the meaning of what he witnesses. He's trying to make sense of surreal, overwhelming experience, just like the reader. Importantly, here we are all reminded that Marlowe's narrative is being retold by another frame narrator, which introduces an additional layer of unreliability. If Marlowe isn't sure of what he experienced, and if we hear it secondhand, then the whole truth remains ambiguous and slippery. Marlowe's lies to the intended the section deals with the final haunting scene of Conrad Heart of Darkness, in which Marlowe lies to Kurt's fiance, telling that Kurt's last word was her name. This moment is replete with moral ambiguity, complexity, and philosophical depth. It marks the second great climax of the novel, the first being Kurt's famous dying words, "the horror, the horror." Why does Conrad climax the story not with Kurt's death but with Marlowe's lie to the fiance? Because this final act contains the full philosophical weight of everything that has preceded it. Marlowe, who has witnessed the literal and symbolic descent into the heart of darkness, both in jungle and in human nature, must now re enter society and reintegrate into a world that refuses to see that darkness. Uh, can we wait till in the next 4 minutes we are finishing? Vandana Sharma has raised hands. Okay, can we just wait for the next 4 minutes? I'll be ending it anyway. The the conflict between truth and illusion. Uh, his lie to the fiance is not a simple deception, it is a moral choice. There is a conflict between inner reality and the social facade. Marlowe lies and tells the fiance that Kurt's last word being her name, and the effect is profound. She gives a light sigh, and Marlowe's heart is struck by what he calls an exalting and terrible cry of inconceivable triumph and of unspeakable pain. Why does he describe her response in this way? Because it captures the deep contradiction at the heart of the moment. Her illusion, and in preserving that, the pain in knowing it was a lie. And she replies, "I knew it, I was sure." And Marlowe, in bitter irony, repeats, "She knew, she was sure." This is not sarcasm, this is the final crushing acknowledgement that human beings often live by illusions and sometimes even need those illusions to survive. Her belief in Kurds as a noble, loving soul gives her life meaning. Marlowe cannot bring himself to destroy that, yet, by protecting her from the truth, he also betrays his commitment to truthfulness, which he claimed to uphold throughout the narrative. So,
हाँ वो तो अब देखो लोगों को देखिए आराम से दे रही है ना अब मेरे साथ जितनी भी थी ये हाँ सब देखिए अपना बात बताओ ठीक है ऐसा
Nitwis, Nitu Nice Goswami, please mute. Please mute yourself.
क्या है हो सकता है दिखावा भी हो सकता है देखिए मैम क्या है कि पति के साथ रह रही है और हम खुद से रह रही है ये बात है तो ज़्यादा ऐसा नहीं
Nitu,
करेगा
Nitu Goswami, please mute.
और
Nitu Goswami, Nitu Goswami, please mute. Yeah, so we are done with this
आप
blog today.
अपना हम तो अपने कोई वैल्यू नहीं है कुछ नहीं है सोना
Neetu
चांदी
Goswami, Neetu Goswami, please mute. Neetu Goswami, please be mindful and please mute.
सकता है मतलब तभी खत्म हो जाता है ना हर चीज का
Somebody can
बच्चे का भी
mute this
खत्म हो
person.
जाता है ना अरे हर एक चीज का वो अगर तो साथ में कुछ ना कुछ कर ही देता
Neetu
है
Goswami,
अरे बच्चा
Neetu
देख रहा था
Goswami,
तैयारी कर दिया अब दिल्ली को कितना सही इतना उसको पति का सपोर्ट है फिर चार बताई रखी आई अब इसको अकेले
okay,
कर देगा
let's
लेकिन
go. If you have any queries, quick queries.
अब उसके पति सब कुछ
I
कर
do not
दिया
know if the host is present here, so I'll not be able to. Neetu Goswami, if you are listening, please mute yourself. Neetu Goswami, Neetu Goswami, please mute yourself.
सपोर्ट बात करनी है वो सब
Anyways, let's focus on if any questions you have. And I see there was a raised hands here. Vandana is raising hand.
अरे सुनील आप उस दिन पूछने चल गए ना कि सुधा ये दवा कितने सब भाव बढ़ गया पता नहीं दिल्ली की बात में
Can
है
somebody
तो
please
सिद्धार्थ को
call her
नौकर
if you have a
से
number?
रहा है स्कूल में क्या हो रहा है इसको आग लग जाता होगा तो मेरा
No,
भाई
I'm not able to mute her because I do not carry the options here.
नहीं आते थे वही
I cannot remote mute this person.
बाप रे बाप ऐसा सब को बर्बाद करने वाला
Is she in the WhatsApp group? Is she in the
पता है
WhatsApp? If she's in the WhatsApp group, can somebody please call her, finding her number, and ask her to mute?
रहती है भाई की तो
Neetu Goswami, if you are listening to all of us, you had been creating a lot of nuisance for the last 4 3 4 minutes. Please be mindful on not muting if it's not required. Please be mindful. So I think we are done with block 6. Vandana has raised hands. I hope, Vandana, you have some meaningful questions with you. So you may please ask. No, no questions. Okay, fine. Anyone else so that we can quickly wind up today's block?
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
Yes, Parijat Bhattacharya. Yes, please.
Bhattacharya. Yes, ma'am. So, yes, I received the mail yesterday after the session was over. So, I could not join the classes prior to that. So, is there
Okay.
any way I can access those classes?
Yes, yes,
My center
definitely,
is RC
definitely. You will
Kolkata.
be able to. Okay. No, but I think that if you have a account, you can just sign in. You can get in, and you will find the um, recorded sessions there. So not a problem.
So, you mean the LMS portal where we have to sign in and like do the things?
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
ma'am.
thank you.
Thank you for your
No, over
cooperation.
the weekend, thank you so much, Parijat. Over the weekend, we do not have Ashmita. We do not have any lectures. We'll meet Monday and probably Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm thinking to keep it towards the evening, more like 5 to 7 kind of. So let me see. Tuesday and Wednesday, more like 5 to 7.
Hello, Dr. Nitasri. Am I
Yeah,
audible?
Saujanya. Just a second, Saujanya. Ashmita, am I answered? Have I answered your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Yeah, Saujanya.
Actually, these timings are not comfortable like for few people.
Hmm.
So it would be there are many chances to miss the classes. So I just wanted to I have no idea how the RC is sharing the recordings to us. So is there any way that we can record and access the classes?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can access classes from block one till date, and probably they will be uploading that, updating that. You just have to get into the account, your own account, your LMS maybe, and there you will find all the recorded sessions.
And also, I have two doubts regarding the theory. In one website, I have heard that the novel is pronounced as novella. Is there any difference?
Yes, absolutely. There is a lot of difference between novel and novella. But before that, may I ask somebody else to answer this question? Can somebody else ask this question? Answer this question?
Novella is a short form and a very small novel, and novel is a bit lengthy.
Exactly. If the novella is having 20 to 30 pages, novel may have a 400 to 500 pages.
Absolutely. Okay. Correct. Yeah, that's correct. All of you, those who have answered this, a novel, novel is basically a very descriptive. You can say, definitely longer than the novella, and novella can be considered sometimes like short stories. So this is the major difference.
And I have
So,
one more doubt as well.
yes,
In the documents that I have read, it is written as IGNO videos only. It is
please.
written as 18th century in words, not with the number. Is there any specific reason for that?
No, 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 nothing like that. Depends on alone. There is absolutely no difference on 18th century in words or in numbers. No difference, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Padma has a question, and after answering Padma, if there is no more questions, we can wind up.
Thank you, madam, for contacting for changing the schedule.
Yeah. And the
Hello.
schedule is basically in the next week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, the last two classes only. So Monday we will have 2:30 to just a second, just a second.
2:30
Monday,
to 4:30.
just give me a second. I'll just again
Okay,
check.
madam.
Um just a second. Regarding Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm very sure that it's mostly Tuesday and Wednesday. It's sure mostly
5 to 7.
5 to 7, mostly 5 to 7. But
Okay, ma'am.
Monday will continue from 2:30 to 4:30.
Okay, ma'am.
So we have three
For
more
only
classes.
MEG-3, madam. After that,
Yeah,
all
yeah, yeah.
courses.
Mm-hmm. Please complete the question, please.
The schedule may be changed for only MEG-3, ma'am.
For the MEG3 only, because I'll be occupied into some other tasks. So I will write it to the office, and the office, once it sends you the revised format, you will get to know.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah,
After that,
okay.
we have 4 to 6 classes, other courses.
Okay, on when? After we are done with MEG3?
Thursday, ma'am.
On Thursday?
MEG-1 from
Yeah, yeah,
Thursday.
yeah. Definitely, definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There will be continuous classes, yes. So we end by Wednesday.
Okay, and those classes may be from 4 to 6 or 5 to 7.
Oh, I'm not sure about all the other MEG classes. I'm not sure about it.
Okay.
Regarding MEG3, Monday 2:30 to 4:30 we continue, and Tuesday, Wednesday, last two classes 5 to 7. I'll try.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Ma'am, hello, ma'am.
Yeah, Vandana, I was asking if you have any
Ma'am, you are
meaningful question.
sending the notes of block 1, block 2, block 3.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer this question to you, Bandana. We have discussed about it many times. So I'll shift to Malini. Malini, you have any question quickly?
Just a quick one, ma'am. On Tuesday and Wednesday, you said it's going to be from 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
These sessions will also be available to me by record. Is that right?
Yes,
Because
yes, yes,
my time
yes.
difference, it'll be very late in the
Yeah.
night for me.
5 to 7. This is what I'm going to propose for the last 2 days. If they say
Mm,
yes, well and good. Anyway, the recording sessions will be given, uploaded.
okay.
So you'll
Okay.
not be missing out on anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ranjan, R. Ranjan.
Hello,
Yeah,
hello.
hi.
Yes,
Hi.
yes. Madam, can you please tell me? Actually, I am from RC Bhubaneswar.
Okay.
Is this meant for only RC Kolkata, or anybody other students from other RC are also here? And second, I have registered under offline course. Can I get the? I don't have the LMS account, LMS IDs. Can I get the recorded? How can I access to the recorded classes?
I think you have to create an account for that. You'll have to talk to the office regarding these technicalities. I'm not very sure of. I'm so sorry for that.
Okay. Okay. I will talk at the regional center nearby.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
Sukanya,
madam.
I hope Sukanya is the last question. Sukanya, quickly, yes, please.
Ma'am, it was the same question as before. Sir has told about your LMS account. Even I am also not having a LMS account, ma'am.
Regarding your accounts, or maybe or you're not able to receive notes or anything. Like I said, these are all technical issues, so you please contact to the office directly. So I'm not really, because I'm not really connected to any of these background information, so I'll not be able to guide you on that. I'm so sorry for that.
It's okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you. We meet on
Thank,
Monday, 2 to 4:30. Thank you.
thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.